I walked into the house with a cold draft following me inside. The kind of draft that hits you right in the gut. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift at the office, deadlines, endless calls, and that gnawing feeling in my chest. The one that comes when you're living a life that feels more like someone else's. I was just hoping for a quiet Christmas, maybe a glass of bourbon with Jessica and Tommy, then bed. But when I opened the door, I was met with a suffocating silence that immediately felt wrong. The house was eerily quiet for a family Christmas. There was no music, no laughter, just the distant hum of the furnace kicking in. The smell of Christmas dinner lingered in the air, but it was overpowered by something darker. I felt it, that tension. It prickled at the back of my neck. My steps echoed too loudly in the grand hallway. "Jessica?" I called out. No answer. The house had always felt too big for just the three of us. It was the kind of place you bought to impress, not to live in. My father had bought it for us, one of those legacy homes, with rooms that felt like cold, silent vaults. The kind of house that says, you've made it, but doesn't really tell you what you've made. I made my way toward the living room, hoping to find Jessica and Tommy wrapped in the warmth of holiday cheer. But instead, I stopped dead in my tracks. There they were, all of them. My family. My parents, my older siblings, even some of their friends. They were gathered around, laughing, glasses in hand. But no one noticed me standing there in the doorway. They weren't looking at me. They weren't even really looking at each other. The whole room felt like it had been choreographed, like an act they were putting on for me, or maybe just for themselves. They were pretending everything was perfect, just like they always did. My heart started pounding as I scanned the room. Tommy's absence felt like a hole in the space. "Where's Tommy?" I asked, my voice thick with something I couldn't identify, fear, dread, confusion. I couldn't tell. Jessica turned slowly, a strained smile on her lips. "Oh, he's in the basement, playing with his toys. You know how he gets when he gets excited about the holidays." Her tone was too calm, too rehearsed. I didn't buy it. Not for a second. I could feel it in my bones. Something was off. I made my way down the hall, my footsteps louder now, as if my heart was pounding in time with them. The closer I got to the basement door, the harder it was to breathe. The door stood ajar. It creaked slightly in the silence, just enough to make my skin crawl. I pushed it open, and that's when I saw it. My stomach dropped. Tommy was chained to a chair. His little face was pale, eyes wide with fear. Bruises, dark and swollen, marred his small arms and legs. He looked at me as though he couldn't believe I was there. Like he had been waiting for me to come and save him, but he didn't know if I would. I couldn't breathe. My son, my 7-year-old son, was chained like an animal in my own home, and there I was, standing frozen at the door. I wanted to shout, to run and grab him, but my body wouldn't move. What the hell was going on? I heard footsteps behind me, soft at first, then growing louder. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My eyes stayed fixed on Tommy, on the chains wrapped around his little wrists. "Ben," Jessica's voice broke through the fog of panic in my mind. "Please, don't." "Don't what?" I said, my voice shaking now. "What the hell is this? Why is Tommy chained up?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a step forward, her face pale, eyes darting nervously. We didn't have a choice, Ben," she whispered. "They made us do it. My father and Carter, he's the one who—" "Stop." I could barely hear my own voice over the pounding in my head. "Who did this to my son?" But Jessica wasn't the one who answered. A voice came from behind me, cold and familiar. "Well, that's the problem, isn't it, Ben?" I turned slowly, my heart sinking even further. Standing there, framed by the door, was my father. Walter Hall. The man who had given me everything, and had taken it all away at the same time. His face was as unreadable as ever, but the glint in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. I was hoping you wouldn't have to find out like this, he said, his voice low, controlled. But now that you're here, maybe we can finally have that talk. I felt the room closing on me. The walls, the faces, everything, like I was drowning in their lies, their secrets. I had been blind, but not anymore. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that nothing was ever going to be the same. This Christmas, I whispered, I'm going to learn just how far my family is willing to go to keep their darkest secrets buried. I could feel the weight of my father's gaze even as I turned away, the house now spinning with an unsettling silence. My head was clouded, my heart racing. Jessica's voice trembled behind me, trying to explain, trying to calm me down. But I couldn't hear her. I couldn't hear anything except the pounding in my ears and the image of my son, chained and helpless, burned into my mind. You have to understand, Ben, Jessica said, her words struggling to pierce through my shock. I didn't want this. I never wanted to hurt Tommy. But they made us do it. I spun around, finally meeting her eyes, but they were filled with something colder than fear, guilt. Who made you do this, Jessica? My voice came out sharper than I intended. The family, she whispered, looking over her shoulder as though someone might be listening. Your father, Walter. And Carter. They're in too deep, Ben. This isn't about us anymore. It's about survival. And if we don't play along, if we don't help them, we're all dead. I could hardly comprehend her words. My father, the man who raised me, who taught me everything I knew about power, was a criminal? And Jessica, my wife, had been part of it all along? It didn't make sense. I wanted to scream, but I just couldn't. What do you mean by survival? What do you mean help them? I pushed further, my chest tightening with every word she spoke. What's going on? Before she could answer, the door behind me creaked open again. I didn't turn immediately, my body still frozen, my mind racing to put together the pieces of the shattered reality before me. But I knew, it wasn't just Jessica anymore. There was someone else here. A low, menacing voice cut through the air, as chilling as ice. I think it's time we had that talk, Ben. My father stepped into the doorway. Walter Hall. The man who had always been my idol, my guiding hand, my provider. His suit was immaculate, his eyes sharp, his expression unreadable. But there was something off, something I couldn't place. His very presence felt suffocating. You've made your choices, Ben, Walter said, his voice calm. And now you'll live with them. Jessica stepped back, biting her lip, her hands wringing together. Ben, please. You don't understand. They're dangerous. My father didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stared at me like a predator waiting for its prey to make the first mistake. It's bigger than you think, son. This family, this empire we've built, it's on the edge of collapse. You're either with us, or you're in the way. And right now, you're in the way. I was speechless, numb. The walls of my own home felt like they were closing in on me. I wanted to fight, to scream, but the words wouldn't come. You and your son, my father continued, his gaze shifting to Tommy, still trembling in the corner, are the leverage we need. The last obstacle between us and what we want. What do you want from me? I finally managed, the question laced with confusion and fury. What have you done to Tommy? To my son? You don't get it, do you? Walter's voice dropped to a low growl, the edge of malice now unmistakable. You think you've been living a life of your own choosing, but all this time, it's been me pulling the strings. I gave you everything you have, Ben. Your job, your wife, your son. Everything. You think you've been in control? No. You've been a pawn. And you're still a pawn. I felt the bile rise in my throat, my heart pounding harder. Every word he spoke cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a lifetime of lies that had been fed to me, wrapped in a bow, dressed up like truth. No, I whispered, barely audible. You can't do this. You can't use Tommy like this. I'm not using him. I'm protecting him, Walter replied, his eyes narrowing. Just like I'm protecting you, Ben. But if you don't help, if you don't fall in line, the only thing I'll protect is the family name. And that doesn't include you. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he stopped and looked back at me, his eyes cold and calculating. You'll find out soon enough. The sooner you accept what's happening, the sooner we can all move forward. But if you keep fighting, you'll lose more than just your place in this family. The door slammed shut behind him, and Jessica's soft sob broke the silence that followed. I stood there, paralyzed. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything, trying to make sense of a world that had just turned upside down. What was I supposed to do now? How could I ever face my father again, knowing what he had become? How could I protect my son from him? As I turned to face Jessica, I noticed something I hadn't before. A slight tremor in her hand, a nervousness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was scared. Not just for Tommy. For herself. They've been watching us, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. They're always watching. The family, the people they work with. They know everything. Even what we say, what we do. I could feel it then, the eyes on me. The feeling that I was being hunted. Trapped in a cage of my own blood, and there was no way out. This isn't just about us, I muttered, the realization settling in my chest like lead. They're using Tommy. They're using everything. Jessica nodded, her face pale. And they won't stop until they have everything they want. I swallowed hard. There was no more running. No more pretending. I had to face this. I had to figure out how to take them down, or else I'd lose everything. But the question is, I thought, can I really trust anyone in this house anymore? I didn't wait for an answer. I turned to Tommy, still chained, still trembling, but now more frightened than I'd ever seen him. The look in his eyes, the helplessness, was more than I could bear. And then, I made a choice. This Christmas wasn't about family. It wasn't about presents, or dinners, or any of the lies they had fed me. It was about survival. And if I had to fight, I would. But it wouldn't be easy. I couldn't breathe. The weight of my father's words crushed me as I stood in the basement, the cold air biting at my skin. Tommy, still trembling, looked up at me with eyes full of confusion and fear. His small hands were raw from the chains, his face pale from the cold. I couldn't believe this was happening. I was supposed to protect him, but right now, it felt like everything was slipping away. Dad, Tommy whispered, barely audible, his voice breaking. Why are you so mad? What's going on? I knelt beside him, trying to block out the noise of my own thoughts, trying to focus. I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get you out of here, I promise. But inside, I knew that promise was starting to feel like a lie. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how deep my family's web of lies had gone. My father wasn't just some successful businessman. He was the orchestrator of an empire built on deceit, manipulation, and violence. And now my son was caught in the middle of it all. I never wanted any of this, Ben, Jessica said, her voice barely a whisper. I hadn't even noticed she had followed me downstairs until she spoke. I never wanted to hurt Tommy. But your father, he doesn't leave us with a choice. I stood up quickly, my frustration flaring. No, Jessica, we made the choice. You and I. You knew what he was capable of. You knew what was happening. But we stood by, and now look at what it's come to. I didn't have a choice, she said, her voice breaking. He controls everything. Everything, Ben. You don't understand. You've been too blind to see it. Her eyes were desperate now, pleading. He's going to destroy us all. He's already made his move. My chest tightened. What do you mean, he's made his move? Before she could answer, the sharp sound of a door slamming upstairs echoed through the house. I froze. Jessica's eyes widened in panic. The tension in the air thickened, as if every second dragged us closer to some terrible reckoning. Ben, you have to listen to me, Jessica said urgently. Walter is planning something big. He's already set things in motion. Tommy is just the beginning. I turned, heart racing. What the hell are you talking about? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. The family, it's all part of it. Everything, my father, Carter, they've been pulling strings, setting us up. This house, this life you've worked so hard to build? It's all a facade, Ben. And it's about to come crashing down. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. What are you saying? What exactly are they planning? Jessica swallowed hard. Walter's been laundering money for years. He's got connections, people you wouldn't even believe. And now he's using Tommy to keep the rest of us in line. He'll destroy anyone who stands in his way. Including you. I didn't know what to believe. How could my father, my family, be capable of something so monstrous? My father had always been the man who taught me everything, how to succeed, how to protect what was mine. But now, all I could see was a cold-hearted tyrant hiding behind a mask of respectability. Suddenly, a sound interrupted the conversation, the unmistakable click of a door opening upstairs. I didn't need to look to know that someone had just entered the house. Ben, Jessica whispered urgently, grabbing my arm. We're not alone. I didn't need to hear it twice. My instincts kicked in. I pushed past her, heading for the basement door. The need to act, to protect Tommy, was all-consuming now. I couldn't wait for answers. I couldn't wait for Jessica to explain any further. There was no time. I turned the corner, and my hand went to the door handle, only to freeze mid-motion. There was a figure standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim hallway light. Leaving so soon, Ben? The voice was chilling. Deep. Familiar. I knew who it was even before the figure stepped into the light. Carter. I felt my blood run cold. Carter, my brother-in-law, was no ally of mine. He'd always been the shadow in the background, the one no one talked about, the one who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. But this was different. His expression was cold, too calm, like he'd been waiting for me. Carter, I said, my voice low, warning him. I don't know what game you're playing, but you're not going to win. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and stepped closer, blocking my way. It's already over, Ben. You just haven't realized it yet. His eyes glinted with something dark, something dangerous. Your father's been planning this for a long time. But you're too far gone now. You've already stepped into the trap. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The trap? Was that it? Was that all this was? But before I could respond, I heard another sound, a thud, followed by the muffled sound of a voice from the other side of the door. Tommy. Dad, help. I shoved past Carter, my heart pounding. The door to the basement was open, and I rushed inside, only to stop dead in my tracks. The sight before me was more horrifying than anything I had imagined. Tommy wasn't just chained. He was covered in bruises, his face swollen, tears streaking down his cheeks. But there was something else. Something that made my blood run cold. A video camera pointed at him. Recording. And standing there, watching, was my father, Walter. His face was stone cold, his eyes devoid of any emotion. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. What the hell is this? I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. Walter's gaze never left the screen. This is how it ends, Ben, he said quietly. You wanted to play hero. Now, you get to watch your son pay for your mistakes. The room spun as I realized the full scope of the game they had been playing all along. This wasn't just about power. It was about control. About making sure I'd never leave this family's grip. But I wasn't about to give up without a fight. You don't get to control me anymore, I said, stepping forward. Walter's eyes flicked to me for the first time. And for the first time, I saw something I never expected from him. Fear. But it was too late. The room spun around me as I stood there, staring at my father, the man who had always been a pillar of strength in my life, now nothing more than a shadow. Walter Hall had never looked more like a monster than he did in that moment. His calm, measured demeanor sent a chill through my spine, as if he were some puppeteer pulling the strings of my fate. The stark reality of his betrayal hit me hard. But this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. You've made a mess of things, Ben, my father said, his voice almost too calm, like he was explaining the weather to me. I didn't want to do this, but you forced my hand. I could feel the weight of his words. They weren't just a threat, they were a declaration of war. His cold gaze never wavered, never softened, even as my blood boiled in my veins. It wasn't just about power, it was about control. My father wanted me to see his power, to feel it, to know that no matter what I did, he could destroy everything I loved in an instant. You didn't give me a choice, Ben, he continued, his eyes flicking to Tommy, still shaking in the corner, his chains clinking softly. We had a deal, you and I. A deal that has kept this family in line for years. But now? You've gone off script. And there are consequences for that. Consequences? I repeated, my voice shaking. You think you can threaten me into submission? You're sick, Dad. What have you done to my son? Your son, your family, their collateral damage, Ben, Walter said flatly. You knew the risks when you got involved. You wanted power, you wanted wealth, but you didn't want the responsibility. Now you're going to learn the hard way. Every word he spoke cut deeper, tearing at the fabric of the life I had believed in. But one thing echoed through my mind louder than anything else, he had just admitted it. This wasn't about money. It was about control. Power. You think this is just about money? I demanded, stepping closer to him, anger surging through my chest. This is about you wanting to control everything. You didn't care about me, about Tommy, about any of us. You never did. For a moment, Walter's eyes flashed with something. It wasn't fear, it was something far more dangerous, resentment. Watch your mouth, Ben, he growled, his voice dropping. You don't get to talk to me like that. I've given you everything you have, and this is how you repay me? I was shaking with rage now, barely holding myself together. Tommy's whimper brought me back to reality. My eyes darted to him, and for the first time, I saw something that twisted my insides. He was looking at me with wide eyes, like he was asking me for a way out, but he was too scared to speak. I turned back to my father, the weight of his actions crushing me. This wasn't just about Tommy anymore. This was about me standing up for him, for us. I'll never be like you, I said, my voice low and threatening. I don't care what it takes. I'm not going to let you get away with this. Walter's expression shifted, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt. But it was gone in an instant. He took a step back, eyes narrowing. Then you're already too late. Before I could process what he meant, there was a loud crash from upstairs. A door slammed open, and heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I could hear the smugness in his voice before he even spoke. Dad? Ben? Carter's voice cut through the tension like a knife. I think we have a problem. Carter. My brother-in-law. The man who had always been a part of this family's twisted dance. He was part of the operation, part of the plan that had led us all here. He stepped into the basement doorway, his face twisted into a sick grin. Carter, what the hell is going on? I demanded, unable to hold back anymore. Carter's grin widened as he looked from me to Walter, then to Tommy, still chained and broken in the corner. Oh, don't look at me like that, Ben. I'm just doing my job. You know how it is. Family first, right? Family? I spat. What kind of family chains a 7-year-old to a chair? Your kind of family, Ben, Carter sneered, stepping further into the room. You're so naive. You think you're better than us? Well, you're not. You're just a pawn in this game. You always have been. Enough, Carter. Walter's voice snapped, cutting through the air. He glared at his son-in-law, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something almost like regret. You'll learn when to shut up. All of you. Get out of here, now. Carter held his hands up, feigning innocence. I'm just saying, Dad. It's not going to be as easy as you think. Ben isn't just going to roll over and let us win. Get out. Walter's voice thundered, a command that seemed to silence everyone in the room. But Carter didn't move. Instead, he stood there, a grin still playing on his lips. You're right about one thing, Dad. He's not going to roll over. But it's too late for him. The money's already been moved, the deal's been done. And there's no going back. The walls of the basement seemed to close in on me. My heart pounded in my chest as the weight of Carter's words settled over me. The deal's been done. The money had already been moved, and there was no way out. The people I thought I could trust, my own family, had already sealed my fate. I turned to Walter, my father, the man who had spent my entire life teaching me how to succeed in this world. And now, he had broken me. He had broken my son. No, I said quietly, the word barely a whisper in the suffocating silence. It's not over. Not yet. I looked at Tommy, still chained, still bruised. I had failed him once. But I wouldn't fail him again. No matter what it took, I was going to bring this all down. I didn't know how. But I knew I couldn't stop until I did. I couldn't stop shaking as I stood there, the weight of what I'd just learned crashing down on me. Walter's betrayal wasn't a surprise, not really. I'd suspected something was off for months now, but hearing the truth from Jessica's lips made it feel like the ground beneath me was collapsing. My father, the man who had built this empire, who had molded me into what I was, wasn't a hero. He was a monster. You know how it is, Ben. Jessica's voice came from behind me, low and careful, as if she didn't want to make the tension worse. You've always been in the dark. We all have. I didn't turn around to face her. The truth was suffocating, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear anymore. But I had to. For Tommy. Your father, he's involved in things that you wouldn't even believe, she continued, her words clipped, as if each one weighed her down. Drugs, weapons, money laundering. He's untouchable, and he's made damn sure we're all tied into it, whether we want to be or not. My stomach twisted. How long? I asked, the words barely leaving my lips. Since before we even got married, she whispered. Since before Tommy was born. I wanted to scream. Every part of me wanted to lash out. To yell at her, to yell at my father, to make it all stop. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed, as the reality of what my life had become sank in. I never wanted any of this, Jessica said, stepping forward, her hands trembling. I tried to leave once, Ben. I tried, but your father always found a way to reel me back in. A bitter laugh escaped me. So, what now? We just give up? Let him win. Jessica flinched at my tone, but I didn't care. I had to know what was next. I had to do something. You can't fight this on your own, she said quietly, almost pleading. I tried, Ben. I tried to protect Tommy from all of this, but it's too late. You need to be the one to stop it now. My fists clenched at my sides, but it wasn't just anger that was consuming me. It was fear. Fear for Tommy. Fear for my family. Fear of losing everything. I wasn't ready to give up. I wasn't ready to let this monster win. The sound of a door creaking open broke through the tension. Carter. His smug face filled the doorway, leaning casually against the frame like he had all the time in the world. Are we having a little family reunion? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Should I be worried? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. His grin faltered just slightly as he sized me up. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like a target in my own home, but it was the first time it felt real. You're a fool, Ben, Carter said, his eyes gleaming with something dark. You think you can just walk away from this? From everything your father's built? Everything my father's built is built on blood and lies, I said, my voice cold. And I'm done being a part of it. For a split second, Carter's face hardened. The smile dropped, but just as quickly, it returned, fake and rehearsed. That's cute. Real cute, he said, stepping forward into the room. But you're in too deep now. So's your son. I lunged at him, the anger bursting free, but Jessica caught my arm, holding me back. Ben, stop. This isn't the way. Carter laughed, backing off. You think you can fight me, fight us? You're just a pawn, Ben. Always have been. Always will be. I'm not a pawn anymore, Carter, I spat. And neither is Tommy. I didn't care what he thought anymore. I didn't care about the family name or the money or the power. I was going to get Tommy out of here, even if it cost me everything. Don't say I didn't warn you, Carter said, his voice darkening, the smile gone for good now. You've already crossed the line. And when Walter's done with you, there'll be no coming back. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a cold pit in my stomach. I glanced back at Tommy, who was still huddled in the corner. His eyes were wide, full of fear, and it made my heart break. But that fear was also a wake-up call. I couldn't keep standing around, waiting for a way out. I had to act. Now. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, ignoring the shaking of my hands as I searched for the number I had been avoiding for months. The one number I had kept from everyone. The one number that could bring the whole house of cards crashing down. David. I hit the call button and waited, the seconds dragging by. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than ever, as I heard the phone ring. David, it's Ben, I said as soon as he picked up. I need your help. You're in deep, aren't you? David's voice was calm, but I could hear the concern beneath it. What's going on? I need you to move quickly, I said, my voice urgent. Walter, Carter, they've been planning something. I don't know what, but they've got everything tied up in ways I can't even understand. Where's Tommy? David's voice cut through the fog of my thoughts. He's in the basement, I replied, my voice dropping. He's chained up. They're using him to control me. There was a pause on the other end, and when David spoke again, his tone was sharp. We'll get him out, Ben. But you need to trust me. This isn't just about your father. There's something bigger going on here. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. I don't care about the bigger picture. I just need Tommy safe. Stay where you are, David said. I'm coming for you. I'll get you out of there. The call ended, and I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I didn't know if David could really help me, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. I glanced back at Tommy, my resolve hardening. This was just the beginning. And I was going to make sure it ended with my son free. But as I turned to face the door, I knew one thing for certain, Walter was watching. He always was. And I wasn't going to let him win. The cold steel of the cuffs dug into my wrists as I sat in the back of the police car, watching the world outside pass by in a blur of lights and shadows. I could still hear the screams of my father echoing in my ears, his last words full of betrayal. The man I had once looked up to, the man who had built this empire with his bare hands, was now nothing more than a criminal in my eyes. But despite everything, there was a strange calm that washed over me. The battle wasn't over yet. The fight for Tommy, for my family, was just beginning. I didn't know what I expected when I made that call to David. Maybe I hoped for a miracle, a way to escape this hellish nightmare. Instead, I got the cold truth. The truth that my father had been controlling everything, pulling strings behind the scenes, making sure I'd never have the freedom to choose my own path. To control is to conquer, he'd always said. It made sense now. The manipulation, the lies. I glanced at the officer sitting in the front seat. His eyes never left the road, his grip on the steering wheel firm. He didn't know that I was no longer just Ben, the son of a powerful businessman. I was a man who had seen too much, learned too much, and now I knew what I had to do. When we arrived at the station, I was processed quickly, no questions asked. They were just doing their job, following orders from the top. But I wasn't going to play along. Not this time. I could feel the eyes of the other prisoners on me as I was led down the narrow hallway to the holding cell. Their gazes were a mix of curiosity and disdain, as if they knew the game I was playing. They didn't realize how much I had already lost. I didn't care about the cell, the bars, or the concrete walls. What mattered was what came next. Ben, it's time. David's voice broke through my thoughts as he stood in front of the holding cell. His expression was grim, but there was a fire in his eyes. Your father may be behind bars, but that doesn't change the fact that he's still got people watching you, waiting for you to slip up. I nodded, barely able to keep my emotions in check. What's the plan? David's lips twitched into a faint smile. It's not about the plan. It's about making sure you never fall into the trap again. He stepped back, his gaze flicking to the officer guarding the door. I've been working with the feds. We have everything we need to bring down the rest of your father's empire. But you have to trust me. It's the only way out. I swallowed hard. The weight of everything was crashing down on me. What if I fail? David didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. You won't. You just have to keep moving. You don't have the luxury of stopping now. Not when Tommy's still out there. Not when your father still thinks he can control you. I looked at him, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and investigations. The feds were on it, gathering evidence, pulling together the pieces of my father's empire. And David was there every step of the way, guiding me, making sure I didn't lose myself in the process. Then came the moment that would change everything. The one piece of evidence we had been waiting for. A bank statement that tied my father directly to a series of illicit transactions, money laundering schemes, and connections to organized crime. It was the smoking gun. I remember the day it came through, the rush of adrenaline that hit me as I saw the document. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. Like I could finally break free from the shadow of my father's manipulation. The walls of my world, which had been closing in on me for so long, began to crack open. But as much as I wanted to celebrate, I knew the real work had just begun. The moment I handed that evidence over to the authorities, my life would change forever. My father's empire would crumble, but I would lose everything. All the wealth, all the connections, gone. And yet, in that moment, I realized that none of it mattered. Not anymore. The truth, the one thing my father had tried to bury, was finally coming to light. You did good, Ben, David said, his voice steady as he watched me. But remember, this isn't just about taking down your father. It's about protecting your son. It's about making sure no one else gets caught in this web of lies and corruption. The weight of his words hung in the air, but I couldn't look back. Not now. Not when Tommy was depending on me. The trial was swift. My father's empire crumbled in a matter of days, and the once powerful man who had controlled everything was left powerless, sitting in the courtroom, his face pale with fear. The truth was out. And it was ugly. When the verdict was read, it was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But as I looked at my father, his head hung low in defeat, I couldn't bring myself to feel anything but pity. The man who had once been my idol was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. But for Tommy, for the future I wanted to build, the fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Weeks passed, and life slowly started to settle back into some kind of normalcy. The scars of the past still lingered, but they were no longer the chains that held me back. Tommy was safe, free from the clutches of the man who had used him as a pawn. And I was free too. Free to make my own choices, free to rebuild what my father had destroyed. As I stood outside the courthouse, watching the sun set over the horizon, I couldn't help but think about everything I had learned. About power. About family. About what it truly meant to be free. They say that power corrupts. But in the end, it's love, the love for those you protect, that gives you the strength to fight back. And as I walked away, hand in hand with Tommy, I knew one thing for sure: no matter what came next, I would never stop fighting for what was right.